So this session is the intentional classroom. So if you're trying to find the correct session, you have found the intentional classroom, the path to purposeful instruction. If you're kind of searching around right now to find the right session, I will let you know that this is good for K to 12, all different contents, all different assignments. So you can be a teacher, a coach, an administrator. This really works for all grade levels, all content levels. Since this is a pre-recorded session, so I'm trying to give everybody, a moment to get on here and find it. Since I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work being pre-recorded, and I'm pre-recording it early, I just want to make sure that I give everyone a minute or so to hop on to the session and be ready to go with it. If you have seen me present the intentional classroom before, this isn't the first time. This is a different session. So if you have seen the intentional classroom before, this is a different session. It goes a lot more in depth than my previous session. So just know you will learn something different from this session if you have attended my previous trainings on the intentional classroom. So if you are just hopping on, if you have just found us or found me, this is the intentional classroom. This is good for K to 12, all different contents, all different assignments. So welcome. If you are looking for the intentional classroom, you are in the right place. My name is Kristin Henry. I have my consulting firm, KH Literacy Education. And I'm excited to be back at TEKSCon. I was here last year and, I was in person with a packed room and we had lots of interaction and lots of fun. I know it's going to be different this year. And I was really looking forward to seeing everybody in person, but I realized that that's not possible. But I am glad we still got to do it virtually. And I am glad that you are all here, and I hope you all had a fantastic summer and are going to be ready to go for whatever comes, right? Whatever comes with the fall. Hopefully there are more decisions that have been made by the time you actually see this than what was happening when I recorded this. So I do want to tell you a little bit about how the session it's going to go today. Let me take us back to the PowerPoint. Here we go. So what they've told me is that you'll be able to ask questions in the chat on your Zoom. So hopefully that is still the case. So you can always ask me questions. I do want to try to make it interactive. So if you do have questions, please ask. I would say the easiest way to probably ask me questions is to tweet me at KH Literacy Ed. So if you want to take a quick picture of that. What's nice about using Twitter is if I don't see your question during the session, it'll still be on Twitter and I can get back to you. Whereas once the chat goes away, if I don't see it, I might not see your question, whereas I will see you in my Twitter feed. So please feel free to tweet me questions at KH Literacy Ed, maybe hashtag intentional classroom so that I know what it is in regard to, but that's probably the easiest way because that way I always get an alert on my phone that it's there. So that's kind of how we're going to try to make this interactive and help everybody get their questions answered today. If you have follow-up questions, so if you think of a question later, or if you want to know more about resources that I have available for you, you can email me at Kristen@khliteracyeducation.com if you're looking for a follow-up support or anything like that. You can also follow me on Facebook at KH Lit Education, Instagram, KH Literacy Ed, of course, Twitter, KH Literacy Ed. You can also check out my website. I have a number of free resources on my website. www.khliteracyeducation.com. If you go ahead and subscribe, then you can get my emails. And so when I have new resources available, I can get those to you. And I don't fill up, I don't blow up your inbox. It's just every once in a while when I have new stuff. But if you want to do that, fine. If you don't, that's cool too. But I want to give you those options to get your questions answered. So throughout the session, I just kind of want to tell you how it's going to go, because usually if you've been to my sessions before, you know I like interaction. I like to give you process time. I like to give you, reflection time. And while I'm not going to give you probably as much time as I would in an in-person session, and this will definitely feel differently than if you've been in my sessions before, since this is pre-recorded. But do know that I will pause briefly because I do believe process time is important. I'm going to give you time to reflect, set intentions, jot down whatever notes you might want to take, and begin creating your intentional classroom, which is really the goal of today, is that you walk away and you are able to create your own intentional classroom. What's nice is you're seeing this in the in July, so you have some time to make some decisions and to set some intentions. And so this is kind of the perfect time for you to come to the session, which is great. So let's go ahead. This is just a little bit about me. Like I said, my name is Kristin Henry. I have my own consulting firm, KH Literacy Education, but I was in the classroom. I taught high school English, all different levels. And I was also a district administrator. I self-published my first book last year. So you might have also attended the training today or in the past on guiding questions, which really is about having productive conversations, which I think is so important these days. And you can still use that during the pandemic. And I will say that everything that we're going to talk about today is pertinent to whichever, what we're talking about today. It doesn't matter if you're going to be online or in person or hybrid. You can take the skills today with whatever setup you have for the fall. So know that this is foundational and you're going to be able to use what you learned today in whatever way, whatever it looks like, you'll be able to use that today. So do know that. And I think that's important to think about because you want something useful for whatever you're implementing come August. So just wanted to share that you will be able to use this. All right. So I love working with teachers, by the way. That's why I decided to go out on my own and be a consultant, because I wanted to be in teachers' classrooms and not stuck in my office. And so I love to present at conferences. I love to instructional coach. I love to model teach. I love to be in teachers' classrooms. I will say that's what I really missed in the spring when we went into the stay-home orders, is I just really missed being in classrooms with teachers and working with teachers, and it made me sad. But I'm getting used to this online training thing, but it's still not the same. So hopefully soon I'll get to be back in classrooms with teachers and students, and that's really my passion, and I'm hoping to be there soon. I also love to travel, which is one of the other bummers of a pandemic, is no traveling. And I'm sure some of you also missed some fun travel plans. Hopefully you're able to get out and about a little bit. My saving grace has definitely been running. I'm a big runner. If it wasn't for running, I might have gone a little bit crazy during this pandemic. So hopefully you all found something that kept you sane, continues to keep you sane. Of course, there haven't been any races, but I'm really looking forward to when I can be back with my fellow runners at a race and have some fun. But that's just a little bit about me. I'm not always working, so that's good. So as I said, this is all about the intentional classroom. If you have seen one of my sessions before, today's session is going to go a little bit more in depth, or as much as time will allow me to go in depth. And it'll actually kind of preview what my book is going to look like. I'm working on finishing up my book, The Intentional Classroom. It might be out by the time you go to this session. It might not be. You know how that is. It's like trying to, the final draft of anything is a challenge. So we'll see. It might be out, but be on the lookout. And if you sign up for if you follow me on any of the social media, you will definitely find out. So I want you to take a second, and this is going to be one of those first kind of reflection moments. I want you to think, what does intentional mean? Like, think about in your life, personal, professional, in your classroom. What does intentional mean? All right, so good old Merriam-Webster defines intentional as done by intention or design. So like design, think of, all of the understanding by design. Think of the synonyms: conscious, deliberate, purposeful, willful, right? It is on, when we're intentional, we are deliberate, it is on purpose. We are making some very conscious decisions about what is happening, right? And that's what we're going to do in an intentional classroom, is we're going to be very purposeful with what we do. Everything that we do is going to have a reason. And I say everything, y'all, this is not about perfection. This is a mindset, all right? Because I think a lot of times we can be really hard on ourselves when we're like, okay, everything has a purpose. And then there's this one thing that we don't know what the purpose was, and don't beat yourself up. This is not about perfection. All of this is about a mindset. It's about a thoughtful, mindful, purposeful approach to relationships, classroom management, planning, assessment, differentiation, and more, right? That's just kind of the elements that I picked to talk about today. But it's a mindset and it's a purposeful approach. So when you think about the intentional classroom, think about these things. It is not, okay? So I think it's important, like, to use examples and non-examples. It is not a 20-minute long warm-up that is unconnected to your learning goal. I've seen it a million times. The warm-up is fun, it's engaging, but it is not connected to anything. And I'm not sure what the purpose was. It's not activities that are fun, but are not connected to larger learning. It is not a series of disconnected experiences. So a lot of times we can do fun things in the classroom, but we don't necessarily know why we did them or what the students were supposed to learn. Everybody's done it, right? Like, when we're reflecting on these things today, just be honest with yourself. I know I can look back at plenty of times where I was not intentional. But the fact is, we don't have enough time to not be, right? We have a ton of standards to teach, often by a time in the middle of spring where they have to take a test, and we need to use that time wisely, right? So our learning intentions for today is to understand what it means to have an intentional classroom, why it's important. And I think I just said why it's important. We don't have the time to be all over the place. We have a lot of goals, and we want to get there. And in order to get there, we need to know where we're going. We need to set that intention. We also need to understand how to set your intentional classroom into motion, right? So those are our learning intentions for today. I always, again, right? So learning intentions, they're going to set us a goal for today. They're going to tell us where we need to go, right? So intentions let us know where we need to go. And then we can decide how to get there. But we have to have that in our teaching. Our success criteria, we're going to create some big idea intentions. We're going to create intentions for different aspects of your classroom, and then we're going to create action steps that will help you begin to have a more and more intentional classroom. So, in my book, I talk a lot about being on a journey and getting on the path, right? Because it's not all going to happen all at once. You're not all of a sudden going to be like classroom intentional, drop the mic, right? You are going to get there by taking steps. And so we're going to get you started taking those steps today. All right, so I want you to take a moment to set some intentions for this session. Like what do you want to get out of this session? I want you to take a moment to set those intentions. All right. And don't forget, if you have questions, type them in the chat, or you can tweet me at KHLiteracyEd. All right, so these are the elements we're going to talk about in terms of the intentional classroom today. We're going to talk about relationships, classroom management, planning, assessment, and differentiation. So, intentional relationships, when I think about that, we're thinking about how we're going to mindfully build relationships with our students. We know that relationships are important. We know they make us more effective. Like kids learn when you have a good, positive relationship with them. But they don't happen with all students automatically. We know that. There's some kids that we click with. There's some classes that we click with and we're like, awesome. But then we have those hard to reach kids. And what do? We have to be intentional about creating relationships even with those kids that are difficult or maybe hard to love or maybe are troublemakers. We still need to intentionally create relationships with them. So think about knowing their names. Make an intention to know their names by the third day of school. It's one of the things I did. I knew my students' names by the third day. Ask questions. And these are just some of the intentions you can set. It is not limited to this in any way. Be empathetic, right? Be understanding, right, of what your kids are going through and do your best for all your students. This last one really comes from, I saw back in January, I saw Cornelius Minor speak, and he was talking about, sometimes we think we have this misunderstanding that, oh, that kid doesn't deserve that. All of your students deserve your best every day, right? And so it's those type of concepts that we have to realize that we're going to do our best for all of our students, regardless how they act, regardless what grades they get, regardless how far behind they are. And that's kind of that concept, is making it a very conscious decision that we're going to do our best for all of our students, no matter what, no matter how snarky they are back to us, right? That we're going to do our best. So these are some considerations when creating intentions for building relationships with students. You can also build relationships around the school. And I say that because there are a lot of resources in the school that can be very useful to us. So this is just a list. This is not by any means the entire list, but really think about how can you engage others in your educational environment to help you be a better teacher, to help you better support your students, to help you get better outcomes in terms of student outcomes and learning and efficacy. You're really thinking about setting intentions for how you can engage other adults too. You need really, those good, positive teacher-student relationships, but you also need relationships with people in your school and in your community where you can all have that same goal. So go ahead and set an intention that deals with building relationships. All right. I would probably give you longer, but for the sake, but think about that, right? You can always go back and rework whatever intentions that you set today. But I do want to make sure we get through all the elements of the presentation in this pre-recorded setting. So our next one is intentional classroom management. So just like academic learning, we need to be intentional about our classroom management. So, you know, my example here is if one of our intentions is we want to set up a successful workshop classroom, what do we need to do in our classroom management plan to make that happen? So if I want my students talking and interacting, but I have them seated far away from each other, or my rules have to do with not talking to each other, then is my classroom strategy actually getting in the way of what my goal was for my students? It's something we have to think about. And so these are, you know, these are some considerations when you do go and set your intentions for classroom management. These are some of the things you can think about. Is your classroom conducive to conversation? So I do a lot of training on student talk because I think student talk is really important. And I've worked with schools on how to increase student talk. But then you go into a classroom where it's just the teacher talking and the rules are really strict about kids not talking. And the environment is just very, it's, you know, rows of desks and rules about talking. And the classroom if your goal is to get students to talk, that classroom management strategy is not matching with that. You know, versus maybe there's rules for how we talk at certain times. Maybe we have students in partnerships, the desks in partnerships or in groups. Of course, who knows what it's going to look like in the fall with all the pandemic stuff. But if you can think about regular, like whenever we're normal or new normal, think about, you know, how you arrange your classroom, what your rules look like. Think about your time and materials efficiency. Think about the procedures you have. If you want to do a lot of group work and projects, is it easy to get to all of the markers in construction paper? Do you have a plan for where their reader writer notebooks are going to be? Think about what are your goals? You know, so if I'm going to have kids journal every day, where are the journals going to be? Do they take them home? Are they in the classroom? There's a lot of things to consider. And then the last one, when I say conducive to consideration, what I mean is it are circumstances taken into account when a student breaks the rules, or if a student is late or something happens? Is it like if you broke it, you do the time? Or is it we're going to take every situation, there's room for conversation, there's room for empathy? This is one of those areas that's kind of difficult, but really think about how you want kids to feel in your classroom. Think about how you would want to be in your classroom and think about kind of that level, if that makes any sense. So those are some considerations that I think you should think about when we think about the classroom management. So it's time for another intention. I want you to think about your classroom management, and I want you to set an intention for this coming year about your classroom management. What do you want to do with your classroom management this year? And like I said, you can always come back and add to these intentions. And if you are always looking for more guidance, of course, you can always email me. And of course, you can always tweet me. Remember, if you have a question, tweet me at KHLiteracyEd. We are now going to look at intentional planning. which I think I kind of have always focused on this planning piece, but I think all the other, what we look at as maybe softer pieces, are still very, very important. But intentional planning, we really look at teacher clarity, but then we also look at different aspects and levels of planning from instructional unit and lesson. And then we also talk about learning intentions, which you saw some examples of learning intentions at the very beginning of this session. You know, if I expect teachers I work with to use learning intentions, I'm going to use them. If I expect teachers I work with to use success criteria, I'm going to use those too. So success criteria is another part of that intentional planning. So when we look at teacher clarity, this is what, a lot of times we I feel like we limit teacher clarity to just, oh, do they know what they're teaching in terms of a goal? But it's really, and this is from Fendick 1990, teacher clarity is clarity of organization, explanation, examples and guided practice, and clarity of assessment. So if we really understand what we're teaching and what we're doing as a teacher, we should be able to check all of these off. Now, to put it in more simple terms, to me anyway, I think these are a little more clear in what we have to do. We have to develop clear learning intentions. We have to understand how we link all tasks, assignments, and activities to that learning intention. So essentially everything in that lesson goes back to that learning intention. Our warm-up, our group project, our journal, everything goes back to that learning intention. We deliver the lesson in a way that is understandable and relevant, right? The way we do our mini lesson, that, you know, that little 10-minute bit, we deliver it in a way that makes sense to our students. We use examples that illustrate and illuminate the concept to the student so they can eventually do the work independently, right? Gradual release of responsibility is where we are going. And then we'll also understand how to use assessment and feedback regularly to drive student learning. So we know how our assessment fits into this bigger picture. We know how to use that assessment to make sure that our follow-up instruction is even better and is working for our students. So this is essentially what, if we have teacher clarity, this is essentially what we have. So I recommend that before we, you know, get into what we're teaching, that we instructionally plan. So maybe for the week, maybe for the unit, we are going to answer these 4 questions. And a lot of times people see these as the PLC questions, right? These are the questions you would talk about in PLC. But I really think that these questions are what we should know the answer to every day before we teach. So we should answer these questions before we get into the nitty-gritty of a lesson plan. What do the students need to learn? How will I know they learned it? What if they struggle to learn it? What if they already know it? If we can answer these questions every day, chances are we have a pretty solid lesson plan. We know the approach, we're being proactive, we've already kind of thought about our differentiation, we already know what our assessment is, right? So as part of an intentional planning piece, we need to have done the instructional planning. If you haven't seen these before, feel free to take a picture of them, because these, I think, are the questions that we need to be answering every day. All right. So when we're talking about lesson planning, really know that everything in your lesson has a purpose. Some of it isn't necessarily academic. You know, my after lunch classes were always like, I had one that they always had to talk. They always had to chat. There was no getting around it. And so I had to do some movement in that warm up. They had to get up, they had to move, they had to talk. And there's definitely some academic benefit to that, but the larger benefit was they kind of got it out of their system. They kind of blew up a little energy. They burned off a little of the sugar from that sweet tea they had at lunch. But think about that every piece of your lesson has a purpose. The warm-up has a purpose. The activity has a purpose. The journal has all of it has a reason connected to that larger goal or to your classroom management goals, right? Like I said, it doesn't always have to be academic. So when we're setting intentions though, when we go back to the setting intentions pieces for these lessons, earlier I asked you to set some broad intentions for this session. What I would say is before the school year starts, you should set some broad intentions for you and your class this year. Think about, what do you want? Do you want your kids to learn to love to read this year? Do you want them to become effective writers this year? Do you want them to learn how to have academic conversations? So some point today or some point before the beginning of the school year, really think about some big broad intentions. So we have these big broad intentions, and then we have unit intentions. So what are the big concepts that we want students to learn in that unit, right? So we have big, broad, like these are, like I said, making students effective readers and writers, or critical readers and effective writers. And then we get to unit intentions. And then finally we get to our learning intentions. And these are the daily ones, right? These are the daily ones. These are the ones that go in our lesson plan. So that's kind of how I break down intention. Success criteria, you're going to have success criteria for every learning intention. For your daily learning intentions, you're going to have success criteria. These are what tells your students what success is. They define success. I mean, that's by definition, it's success criteria. So if a kid, I mean, I want you to think about it like this. If a kid said, hey, how do I get an A today? What does a check plus look like? What does success look like today? That's your success criteria. It could be bullet points on your agenda. It could be a checklist. It could be a rubric. It could be an example. It's something that I find very useful to have talk about it in the beginning of class and use it as your closure at the end. My teachers that have started using this really use it as an effective closure at the end. Other teachers say that it really helps students understand exactly what they need to do, right? It makes it very, very clear to a student what needs to happen that day. And I think that's very powerful. It's part of that clarity piece. If students don't know what they're learning and don't know how they need to show it, that's where we kind of get into problems. So success criteria are going to allow us to do it. So here's an example. So we have our learning intention. Students will explain the significance of events in a short story. So that's our big goal for today. That's what we want them to learn that day. The success criteria, that's how they show us that they know it. So we have 3 success criteria for this one learning intention. Students accurately identify 3 significant events in the short story. Students accurately explain what makes the event significant. And students accurately use text evidence to support their explanation. So maybe they write this short paragraph on their exit ticket, and that's their success criteria for today. Now, I've had questions about, well, accurately, what does that mean? You're having ongoing conversations. You're modeling constantly what it means to be accurate, what it means to be effective. So, I mean, we're still using all of those great tools. We want to model. We want to show them what it means to be accurate, right? We want to show them what it means to use text evidence. But this is the success criteria for this intention, right? So this is an example of what it would look like. You would write it on the board. You would talk about it with your students. So I want you to practice. So I want you to think of a standard that you're going to teach in the near future. And I want you to create a learning intention with success criteria. Clearly, I've used this as part of my presentation before. We're not sharing it today. Sorry. I wish I could see what you were doing. I wish I could see it, but I can't. But go ahead, practice writing an intention and some success criteria. I'm going to go ahead and put it back on the example. So you have that example to look like, but I'm going to give you a couple minutes to kind of think about what this would look like in practice for you. So remember, you're coming up with your own. You're writing, you're thinking of a learning intention and creating some success criteria for something you're going to teach in the near future. So again, if you have questions about this or you do want to share some examples with me, type your question or give feedback in the chat, or go ahead and tweet me. If you have larger questions later, of course, email me and I can follow up with you. I'll absolutely, this is the stuff that I'm passionate about, so we'll absolutely help you with this. All right, so some other things to consider when you are planning. The importance of using I statements. So if you're modeling, right, I just said you have to model. What does accuracy look like? How does it mean to do this? Really think about using I statements. So you would say, oh, when I see this word and I don't know it, I decide to use the dictionary. Or when I'm annotating, I underline this word because I think it's important. Remember, it's important to use I statements because we don't want to put our thinking in the heads of our students. So use I instead of you. Also think about the gradual release of responsibility, right? We want these students to eventually be able to do this on their own. So how can we set that up in our larger planning considerations? I like using examples and non-examples. You saw that when I gave you the example of what it is to have an intentional classroom and what it is not to have an intentional classroom. Think about providing a stimulus or visual. I think this is really important with online learning. So if you're doing a lot of online or hybrid learning, when you come back, really think about providing some sort of stimulus to whatever they're learning. That would definitely be one of the things that I think about, especially for online learning. Think of the depth of learning. You know, there's surface learning, there's deep learning, there's transfer learning. Where are your students staying? Are we getting them up to that transfer, right? We have to do surface, and then we get more practice and feedback, and we get deep, and then we get even more practice and feedback, and then we're able to transfer it to something else. But be really thinking about moving to deeper as we go through a unit. And of course, closure. Like I said, you can use those success criteria as a great closure to wrap up the day, have students kind of figure out, hey, did we learn what we needed to learn today? Do we need to work on this a little bit more tomorrow? It also gives you some great feedback. So, you know, this is TEKSCon, and I would like to say that you can use, I mean, you have this great resource with Teex Resource System to help you create these intentions, right? So you can use your instructional focus document, you can use your performance assessments to help you set your intentions. I mean, that is really driving a lot of what you're doing. So really look at, when you're looking, especially with the performance assessments are very in-depth. There's a lot to them. You can definitely use those to set your goals and to set your success criteria. So take advantage of the system that you have, take advantage of your curriculum, and really use that. I mean, there's a lot already there. You're not creating these things from scratch. Use that to help you with the planning, right? You already have this great document and curriculum that you can use. So really take advantage of those to help you plan. All right, it's time to set another intention. So set an intention about your planning. Like, what are you gonna do this coming year differently in terms of planning? So think about all the considerations that I just talked about and go ahead and set an intention. All right. So hopefully you set a great intention. Of course, you can always come back and look at it. So now we're going to talk a little bit about intentional assessment, right? When we're talking about teacher clarity, assessment is a big piece of that. So the assessment needs to be aligned to the instruction, it needs to be purposeful, and it needs to lead to more effective instruction. So, I mean, we need to be thinking about how are we using formative assessment on a daily basis, and why are we using the assessment we're using? What type of information do we want to get out of this assessment to make the rest of our instruction better? We need to be thinking about those things. So, what type of data do we want to get out of this assessment? How are we going to use that data? Are we assessing what we actually taught, and does everything align? So, I mean, it's really about thinking about, hey, what type of data do I need to better plan my instruction, right? What do I need to know about what these kids know or how these kids are learning it? How can I then create that assessment to get the information that I need to move forward? Sometimes it's like, oh, I'm going to throw this quiz. Well, what is the purpose of that quiz? What type of information do you want out of that quiz? What is that exit ticket doing for you? How are you using it? It's like, for me, I would be like, okay, I'm teaching this certain thing. I need to know that the kids learned it. That's what's going to be their exit ticket. Then I'm going to use that exit ticket to form my groups tomorrow, because I know from that exit ticket that these students have mastered it. These students are well on their way to mastering it, and these students are struggling. So I want to put all my strugglers together so that I can work with them in small group, and I can maybe give a little extension to my group of kids that really get it, and then I'll have my kids there kind of in the middle. So I very purposefully have created assessment that is going to let me give kids feedback, but it's also going to help me form my groups the next day so that I can effectively intervene. Those are some of the things that is how intentional assessment really works. It's another intention time. I know it's a lot of intentions, but my goal today is that you take a second to think about your own practices and what you do, and think about what you want them to look this coming year, right? Think about how you're practicing in the classroom right now, not in a judgmental way, just in a very honest way. And then go, how do I want to do it differently? Or what do I want to tweak for this next year? What do I want to really think about? So take a moment. This intention is about assessment. All right. Of course, you can always come back to these intentions, and I would really ask that you do come back and kind of like build them out a little bit more after you have a little bit more time for reflection. Our next part is intentional differentiation. And the big thing, there's a lot that goes into intentional differentiation, but the big thing that I want you to take away is that it is a process. You are constantly thinking about how you're going to differentiate. There's no cookie cutter, no two teachers have you all have your own kids and your own classes. No two teachers' classes look the same. You're all going to have a slightly different approach to how you differentiate for both your students that need extra help and your students that are advanced that need extension. But I want you to think about it as a process. And I think when you start thinking about it as a process and you begin to create your own process, which might be your intention at the end of this, right? That I think makes it a little bit easier. So some things to consider as you're creating this process for yourself, this differentiation process, is the places you know students will struggle. You're going to be thinking about misunderstandings. You're going to be thinking about mistakes. You're going to be thinking about less areas in your lesson where language or vocabulary may be confusing. What broad-based strategies are you already using? Like what are you already using that's helping students? You need to think about what mastery looks like, what this could look like at the next level, and how this assignment can be done more independently. So when we're thinking about our differentiation, these are all things that we can take into account and consider during that process. And then we have, this is a checklist that I would use as part of the process, right? We're gonna have proactive instructional planning. Remember, we're gonna ask ourselves those 4 questions. What do my students need to know? How am I gonna know they learned it? What happens if they struggle? What happens if they already know it? We're gonna have aligned instruction, right? If we're a Teex Resource District, we're gonna be using that instructional focus document to have really great aligned instruction. We're gonna have intentional assessment that is aligned to that instruction. We're gonna have data collection. We're gonna be collecting data every day and all the time and all over the place. We're gonna have data organization. If you use error coding or anything like that, I wish I had more time to talk to you about that, but that is a way we can use. We're gonna have intentional instructional choices. We're gonna think about how we group, you know, homogeneous versus mixed ability. We're gonna think about small group instruction. We're thinking about scaffolded materials. We're thinking about one-on-one conferences, product choice. Then of course, we're gonna have reassessment and reflection, right? We don't want students staying in static groups, right? We want them to be moving, we want to be very fluid, and we want to group based on needs. Intention time, let's set an intention about differentiation. Think about what you want to do this year with your process for differentiation. Okay, of course, I'm gonna recommend that you go back and work with these a little bit longer after this session. So here's some things I want you to think about. If you are gonna be online, if you're gonna be intentional online this coming fall, really think about big, broad goals. I do have an entire blog about this that you can access on my website for free. Big, broad goals, right? We don't want, you know, especially if we're planning for a week, think big, broad goals. Think making it relevant and meaningful, especially to what's going on in the lives of the students at that moment. Because if they're going to be home and away from you, it has to be meaningful enough that they're going to take the time to do it. Use some sort of stimuli, some sort of visual, some sort of quote, something to really engage them and make them think. So you have a little bit left in your summer. So this would be my summer checklist in terms of being ready for any online or hybrid learning. Get to know your online platform. Hopefully by now you know that if you are going online, at least for part, what type of platform you're using. Is it Google Classroom or Canvas or whatever? Are you able to use Flipgrid and Padlet and those different things? Prepare to launch online immediately. So if you're going back in person, but there's a chance that you're gonna have to go online, I would make sure you get passwords and everything kind of organized at the very beginning on that first day. Plan to implement online learning into your, that should say integrate online learning into your curriculum immediately. Like think about using things like Google Sites and Google Classroom from the very beginning to make sure that students know how to use it. And then research and advocate. You still have a little bit of time. If you haven't already kind of figured out some things you might want or might need for your classroom, do that, right? And then advocate for why your students would need these different resources. I think that's really important. So an intentional classroom in action. Let me show you some examples. Let me stop my share and I'm gonna share. I have one more thing I wanna show you if it'll pull it up. I guess we'll just do desktop. And because it is my, nope, that's gonna go, nope. I guess I need to get out of my PowerPoint. Come on. All right. I'm gonna, sorry, y'all. I'm trying to show you some examples. There we go. Okay. Here we go. Not that. No, go away. All right. So here's some planning materials. So if I were going to create a unit, I would create a template for that. This is for instructional planning. So these are templates that you can use in your classroom, in your PLC, and your planning. This is an example of kind of what I would make sure is in a lesson plan. It's like bare minimum lesson plan. And this is kind of what it might look like. So that would be a example of a unit. I also have in here, I also think that you can use these concepts in PLC and put these as part of your PLC agenda, set team intentions, set individual intentions. And I'm working, like I said, I'm putting all of these into a resource. But I think that accountability is pretty important. And that's actually what I'm going to talk about next. If I can get back to my Zoom. There we go. Or not. All right. So I am going to go back. Stop share. There we go. There I am. I'm going to wrap up real quickly by talking really about the need to reflect while we're creating an intentional classroom, because it can be hard, right? It can be hard to stay, on track. There's my PowerPoint. It can be hard to stay on track in terms of keeping up with an intentional classroom. So those were some examples we talked about. And so these, like I said, we need a little bit of personal forgiveness. Like I said, we're gonna make mistakes. It's a mindset, it's not about perfection. You need to review your intentions throughout the year. So really think about setting goals for yourself. Maybe you set some calendar alerts. Like, I'm gonna relook at my intentions once a month or every couple weeks. Do a time study to see how you're actually spending your time. It's just kind of a time journal. You're just taking notes of how you spend your time. And I think what's really powerful is if you have like a teacher partner or your PLC, and you can have some group accountability and helping yourself really be intentional and really stick with those big intentions throughout the year so you can have a really powerful, impressive year. So let's set another intention. So in terms of keeping yourself accountable, this intention is about keeping yourself accountable, being easy on yourself, implementing your intentional classroom. All right. So now, really think about, and I'm going to kind of leave this with you as something as your follow-up, right? Your follow-up to this session is to set your intentions for the year. What are your big, broad, bold intentions for this year? So that's going to be, because we are running out of time, but that's what I really want you to take away. I want this to be your follow-up, that you set your big, bold intentions for the year. So create some intentions. I want you to identify action steps. So, those action steps are really important to make sure that we actually fulfill that. So create those intentions, create those action steps before the beginning of the year. So sometime between now and before the beginning of the year, create those. And then, of course, be on the lookout. I am working on a book on this topic, and it might already be out yet, but I'm not sure. So just kind of be on the lookout if you are interested in learning more about this topic. If you do have questions, don't forget, tweet me. That's probably at this point the best way. And stay connected. Please stay connected. Email me with your questions and follow me on the website. However you would like to get more information, I am here for you. And thank you so much. I'm so glad you were here for TEKSCon this year. I'm very excited that you watched this pre-recorded session. A big thank you. Thank you so much for your attention, for being intentional, for what you do for the kids. I know whatever happens in this fall, you're gonna do an amazing job. And I'm gonna go ahead and put my contact information up here a little bit longer, just in case you need it. Again, my name is Kristin Henry. I've had a great time with you today. Thank you so much for watching my session here at TEKSCon this year. Hopefully I can see you in person soon, because that would make me really, really, really happy. And yeah, thank you so much. I hope to hear from you. And if you have questions, let me know.